First, I want to thank you for choosing this platform to have this conversation, brother. Only thing I really want to ask, well, to open it up, I want to say, do you support Nazis and white supremacists? Full disclosure, folks, this is Dr. West Anahita. She reached out to my wife, Sheila, and she said that Dr. West had some things he wanted to discuss based on the tweet he sent out that's caused an uproar within some folks on the internet, on Twitter particularly. So with that full disclosure, Dr. West, I'd like for you, if it's possible, sir, for you to go ahead and I want you to speak your piece on this because you know what this is about. And then I'll ask some questions after you've had your say.
Yeah, it strikes me that it's quite sad that people want to dictate who you can pray for. See, I'm a free black man and I pray for anybody I choose to pray for. People can criticize my politics and so forth, but you see, there's an irreducible moral and spiritual witness that's a fundamental part of who I am. So you remember, I put out a little tweet and I say, I pray for the precious family of Navalny. And people say, oh, he's a neo-Nazi. Why you mention him whatsoever? He doesn't deserve any attention. Well, people, they can have their opinion about that. But anybody who's, I think, is falsely accused and is either tortured or murdered by the state, regardless of their ideology, I pray for their family. But I didn't want to just focus on him. I had just spent a magnificent session with Brother Mark, Sister Susan, and the one and only Pam Africa, talking about this dear brother who I love so very much, Mumia Abu-Jamal. Wrote the foreword in 1997. And then was blessed to write the foreword for writing on the wall. I love this brother. I respect this brother. I want his case to be more highly visible. There ought to be an international discussion sustained every day, every week, freeing Mumia. I've been dedicated to that for almost 35 years. Same is true with this brother here. Brother Imam Jamal Abdullah Al-Hameen. I wrote the afterword for this book with Brother Mari. Why? Because he ought to be free. Same is true with Leonard. I don't know Leonard as well, but same is true. Same was true with Oscar Rivera, where we actually put pressure on and released him and had a big gathering for him right at Samuel Cruz's church in Brooklyn where we were there together. So I've been at this for 40 years, though, brother. Same is true with the Iranian sister who's in jail, falsely accused, and state-sponsored terror. That's a moral issue. Now, people got upset and they said, well, you had a picture of all of them together and you can't mention Mumia in the same sentence that you mentioned Navalny. Now, I can understand the concerns there because Mumia is my brother and we have a similar political view to the world. Navalny is a Russian nationalist, so we don't have a similar view to the world, but he still got a family. He still got, he got children. So that doesn't mean that I'm not concerned about his children. It's just that we have different ideologies. I'm taught in prison for 41 years. There's a whole lot of brothers in there who are falsely accused. I support them. We don't have the same ideology. They're not all revolutionaries, but I'm concerned about them.
First, I want to thank you for choosing this platform to have this conversation, brother. Only thing I really want to ask, well, to open it up, I want to say, do you support Nazis and white supremacists? And I know that's crazy to ask that question. I almost can't get it past my teeth, right? But this is something that people have had you on this show 3 and 4 and 5 times. They are making these accusations. So once again, do you support Nazis and white supremacists?
Yeah, isn't it sad that you even had to answer that question when these are the same folk that's been having death threats and throwing all kind of lies at you and thinking about bullets coming your way. I've had people come to my house, put guns all around the house, put guns to my wife's head and mask and so forth. And they say, oh, do I support them? Yeah. Well, that's sick. You know, just the question itself is just so sick. It's hard to even dignify it. You know what I mean? What are they talking about? It's a sad thing. But of course, part of my question though is that so oftentimes you get folk who claim to be revolutionaries, but won't say a mumbling word about fascists and crypto fascists who are crushing poor and working people in the countries where they are being supported by, in terms of their ways in which they facilitate a silence around them. You see?
Yeah.
And that's it. Why? Because it's complicated. Iran, for example, crushing the woman life freedom movement. Where's the critique of the fascist policies of Iran? Putin himself. Well, we don't want to say a word about Putin because he's anti-American imperialism. Putin's been a gangster and is a gangster, and he crushes dissenting voices. That doesn't mean that I support the war in Ukraine. I don't. It was U.S. imperial power that provoked Putin. But Putin's a gangster. Biden's a gangster. Pentagon run by gangsters. Gangsters running Iran. Gangster taking over in Indochina, and they come in all colors. The gangsters running Uganda right now. They come in all colors. Well, Brother West doesn't understand imperialism and anti-imperialism. Well, let's sit down and have a conversation, because I'm going to be morally consistent. I'm not going to be silent about forms of domination and forms of oppression just because that nation is critical of U.S. imperialism. No, not at all. Well, you're just an extension of the State Department. State Department ain't got nothing to do with my free thinking. I'm as critical of the State Department as I am any other State Department in other countries. But that's just basic, man. That's just being morally consistent. If you're going to be on Iran's plantation, then say it. If you're going to be on Putin's plantation, say it. We're already critical of those who's on Biden's plantation. We're critical of those who's on Apex plantation. But get off the plantation. The aim is not to get off one plantation and get on another plantation. Get off Jimmy Dore's plantation. Think for yourself. If he's disrespecting a black man, can you say it on your show? No, they can't say it on their show. Very interesting. Very interesting. Oh, I see.
Well, without Jimmy Dore, nobody would know who these people are. And every couple months, they got to have them come on just so people remember that they even exist. So that goes for the whole lot of them. But Dr. West, back to Navalny, I got to ask you, brother.
Yes.
They say he's a Nazi. They say he's a white supremacist. How do you feel about him? Because I'm not going to pretend to know much about the guy, other than I know he was jailed. I know he was in opposition to Putin, and I know he died in jail in the penal colony. And we don't know exactly what the circumstances were at the moment, but this is what set it off. You said, okay, this man died, and you said, he died in he was a political prisoner in your eyes. They say he wasn't. If he's a neo-Nazi or white supremacist, do you think he was? And if so, would that at all change your tweet or whatever?
Well, one thing is, though, brother, and here's a fascinating conversation to have, that I don't think anybody ought to be falsely accused and murdered by the state based on any ideology they have. I don't think a Klan member ought to be falsely accused and killed by the U.S. government. I don't believe in just eliminating people just because they're full of hatred at all. They got rights too. And if they got members of their family, many of whom not even Klansmen. So why are you going to assimilate all of them and act as if you have absolutely no concern of them? Because see, when you start that kind of logic, and we've seen it over and over again, you see, you end up starting to demonize folk you disagree with. Next thing you know, you're demonizing each other. I mean, I wonder sometimes, even with people that claim to be together, sooner or later they're going to be at each other's throats, because nobody agrees with everything all the time. So next thing you know, you start demonizing them. Next thing you know, well, maybe you ought to be eliminated. You wrong just as anybody else. Now, let's be very, very honest about this. Mufti Abu-Jamal is one of the great intellectuals, great freedom fighters, and spiritual healers of the last 50 years. And so for those who are deeply concerned about what we didn't like the picture together, I can understand that juxtaposition and being upset about that. But people who know me and know the depth of my love and respect for Mumia, I know Mumia himself doesn't believe in just eliminating people based on what they believe and being falsely accused. and murdered by the state. That's not Mumia Abu-Jamal at all. So the folk who claim to be speaking in his name, shame on them and shame on them trying to separate me from my brother. The same is true with H. Rap Brown, my brother who's now at Carl. Same is true with Leonard Peltier and so forth. Same is true with the precious sister in Iran. It's there's West again defending those figures at the State Department. Bump the State Department. The State Department has its own gangsterism. I'm not determined by them. I make my own decision because I'm a free Black man who has a moral sensibility and spiritual sentiments that I learned a long time ago, and I'll never apologize for it, ever. I will always have a moral concern about people who are falsely accused and who are murdered by the state. That is a fundamental bedrock view that I have of the world. Now, of course, I love Mumia more than others because I know we were in prison together. We sang together with James Conan and Brother Chris Hedges when we went there. Take a bullet for the brother. That's our connection. And so, at that point, I want to make that very clear. I think we made that clear in the second tweet that we made in terms of my deep love and respect for him. But it's interesting how folk would come up with anything in order to try to pit us apart when we're trying to focus on empowering the people and they trying to focus on keeping their podcasts together and keeping their reputations together. We say, oh my God, my God.
A few years ago, when I was Tim Black of the progressive, Tim Black of the left, I had people doing 3-hour podcasts saying that I supported Joe Biden, which I never did when I voted for Jill Stein. So, and the lies the lies get bigger, and they just keep telling them. They just keep on spinning them and keep telling the same lies. So it's very little you can do. I just find it disingenuous, Dr. West, that people that I know they know you. If you speak to Dr. West for any length of time, and if you've done it repeatedly, and then you actually float an idea, an accusation that the brother loves white supremacists or coddles Nazis, like that means that whole time you spent, you weren't being real. I mean, or either your brain something's wrong with your logical, your cognitive abilities. Because how could you spend so much time with a person and not know that by now? If that's truly what you believe, so that means you're being salacious, you're being extremist, just for viewership or just to sensationalize the moment. Because how could you truly believe that Dr. West loves Nazis? Like, how could you, I don't understand there's some things I can understand, like maybe Dr. West likes pepperoni on his pizza, or maybe he likes pineapple on his pizza. But I can't imagine, Anthony, that you like Nazis, that you prefer or coddle or support Nazism. And I would never, how can you say that?
That's why we went down to Charlottesville and put our bodies on the line and almost got killed by the gangster Nazis and the Klan, because somehow I like Nazis and I have a tilt. Oh, please, that's sick. But keep this in mind, my brother, that it's very, very difficult to get people to understand something when, in order to understand it, they might lose some of their livelihood.
Oh.
Or they won't make as much money, or they won't have as much status. So at that point, ain't nothing rational going on at all, man. Not at all.
But the people that are listening and agreeing, so you can say anything. Anyone can make any type of proclamation. But the people that are actually going, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. He'd been in the prisons trying to help prisoners for 40 years, but yeah, he must be a Nazi lover. He speaks against white supremacy, wrote a book called Race Matters, and he's been fighting for liberation for 30, 40 years. He grew up next door to the Black Panthers, but no, he probably really likes white supremacists. Like, how can you agree with that and be a free-thinking, intellectually sound human being and agree with that narrative and not see through it for what it is?
Well, the good news is that a lot of people will see through it. People are not frozen in their particular perception at the moment. They're not ossified and petrified. that everybody been tied to lies and fabrications at some point in their lives. And you just hope and pray that people will be able to see through it. Now, if we reach the point where things turn upside down and people who concerned about the legacy of Martin King and Fannie Lou Hamer end up being pro-Nazi, and the people who are pro-Nazi are building on the legacy of Martin Luther King and Fannie Lou Hamer, you say, "Oh, Brother Tim, I know the crack house is not a good place to spend too much time, but this world looks like it's been turned so topsy-turvy that everything is blurred. Everything is completely called into question. You can't even have a conversation because the lies have got so thick." Well, that's the beginnings of fascism too. And we already had fascism operating in the United States and other parts around the world, right? In various forms. But it becomes even worse. And that's a possibility though, brother. We have to be very honest about how grim and dim things really are. Very much so. But the good news is there's always a cloud of witnesses, man. There's always people out there who gonna say, "No lie lives forever. Truth crushed the earth shall rise again." And I say, check out the Tim Black Show and you're gonna get some serious light. Nobody has a monopoly on the truth, but you're gonna get some deep light. And thank God there's some other shows out there that's trying to do the same thing. And as long as we got a cloud of witnesses, it's like I told my brothers and sisters in Harlem that they're on 153rd Street in Amsterdam. Don't you get weary. We come from a great Black people who've been lied about, terrorized, traumatized for 400 years, and we always produce a cloud of witnesses, even when some of the Black people are lying about you. Don't you get weary, because you come from a great folk, and sooner or later the breakthrough can be real. Will we triumph? We don't know. But we go down swinging. And we go down with free.
That's right. That's right. Go to Cornel West 24. What is it? Dr. West24.com?
Right. Cornel West 2024.com.
2024.com. Go there. Listen to Dr. Check out Dr. West's policies. Look what he stands for. Look at what he's running on. Forget tweets. You know, that's not the totality of this brother's message or of the campaign. And give it a thorough examination for yourself before you jump to any conclusions based on rhetoric you hear from those in the blogosphere.